Saturday, August the 3rd, 2024. I can't actually wait to do some of these prediction videos. And given the fact there were so many good fights, so many big names on this card, I want to do these prediction videos early and get these out early. Obviously, the card I'm talking about is the card that will be headlined by Terence Crawford versus Israel Madrimov. Have a look there on screen. Just in case you didn't already know, it is live on the Zone pay-per-view, the global home of boxing, 150 fights per year. The best, mind you, in boxing. You can have a look there on screen. In the comment section, there's actually going to be a pinned link to the Zone where you can find all the details you will need about this pay-per-view extravaganza. It's going to be flipping amazing. The card is stacked, and one of the fights that and here's the thing, right? This is such a good card that this is one of the fights that I'm looking forward to. On any given show, it might be the fight I'm most looking forward to. It's not even that. And that's to say it's a bad fight. It's a great fight, but there's so many good fights on this card. It is obviously the fight I'm referring to is Andy Ruiz versus Jarrell Miller. Now, this fight, it kind of did just come about, so to speak, really, because with Andy Ruiz, there was a lot of questions about him in as much as, when is he going to be fighting next? He fought Luis Ortiz early September 2022. So by the time he gets in the ring, he'll have been out of the ring for the best part of 23 months. And if you really want to look at it in kind of this doesn't look good when you think about it. He had his rematch with Anthony Joshua in December of 2019. So it's been a quick 5 years. It's not quite been 5 years, but come December, it will have been 5 years. Been quick. Now, he had that fight in 2019, the end of 2019, December. Since then, not taking this fight into the consideration, he's only had 2 fights. So 2 fights in nearly 5 years. This will be his third. That's really not good. That's really not good. It's not good ideal preparation at all. Whereas Jarrell Miller, he made his comeback in 2022, having had at least one suspension anyway. I know obviously he was inactive from, I think, October of 2018 up until 2022. So he was inactive for quite a while because obviously there was meant to be the Joshua fight. We didn't have that. We know why. I think he was meant to fight then in 2020. And we know what happened again, failed another test. So he was out of the ring then for an extended period of time. Came back against, I think it was Bracamonte he came back against in 2022. Has had fights in between, has fought the likes of Lucas Brown. He's kind of fought some low level, then he's fought the likes of Lucas Brown. He obviously had his real big step-up fight. And arguably you could say it was the biggest name on his resume against Daniel Dubois in December of last year in the Day of Reckoning show. He lost that fight. He was very, very... Jarrell Miller is always very heavy, but lately since the comeback, pre-ban, he was weighing in or around the 300s. I think there was some fights like when he fought Johan Duapis where he was actually, I think, in the 280s and then was straight back into the 300s. So he's been very heavy the last couple of fights, and against Daniel Dubois, against someone who a lot younger, a lot lighter, and he was just able to use his jab, keep Jarrell Miller off him. When Jarrell Miller did get close and he did have his success, he couldn't maintain it. When you look at a prime, I will say a prime Jarrell Miller was kind of 2018 Jarrell Miller. He could maintain a decent pace. He could set a high tempo. He could maintain a decent pace. He could hold that, and now he can't. And I think a lot of people are going to be saying, well, they know why. And I'm sure the extra weight doesn't help. If you're shifting 300 plus pounds, you can only throw punches for so long. And he is getting older, Jarrell Miller, and he's definitely in his mid-30s now. So you're not going to have the same output that you had 6 years ago when you were younger, irrespective of what's going on with regards weight and stuff like that. So Jarrell Miller, we don't really know kind of where he's at. We have a better gauge of him, though, than we do of Andy Ruiz. At least with activity-wise, you better gauge of where Miller's at. You would think following off from that loss to Daniel Dubois, he will have learned, he will have said, okay, this is what I did wrong, this is what I need to address. With Andy Ruiz, we only have 2 fights, as I said, in the last 5 years. And, that's not much to go on. In the Joshua rematch, he came in, even by his standards, out of shape, Came in out of shape. He then doesn't fight for well over a year, December to April of 2021. December 2019 to April 2021. That was an inactive stretch. He then fights Chris Arreola, and Chris Arreola, he gave as good as he got in that fight. He dropped Andy Ruiz, but Arreola had seen better days many, many years prior. It's not like, Arreola was kind of coming towards the end of his career. He was, but you know what I mean? He'd been on the decline for years prior. So you would expect Andy Ruiz with Eddie Reynoso looking in much better shape by his standards to do a much better job than he did, and he didn't. He made that fight very hard for himself. And then he fights an ancient Luis Ortiz. And yeah, he dropped him a couple of times, but still, it wasn't a performance that made you think, whoo, Andy Ruiz is back. And then he, again, goes off the radar for nearly 2 years. So we really have very little to go on. Now, had this fight have been, we'll say, 2019 version of each man, we'll say the Andy Ruiz who fought Anthony Joshua, let's say he turned up against Jarrell Miller, who turned up against, Marius Vac, Johan Duapas, I would say that's an interesting fight. I would say it's a fight that I would favour Ruiz in. It's a fight that I think if it was a 10-rounder, if it was a 12-rounder, I think Ruiz would win. He'd win it on points. And I would be fairly comfy in that prediction now, I have to say. I'd be fairly comfy to pick Andy Ruiz in that scenario. The problem is we don't actually know if we'll ever get the Andy Ruiz who fought Anthony Joshua. We don't know if the fire is there, because at that time, you got to think about it, Andy Ruiz was a contender. He was a contender who had one world title fight, which was against Joseph Parker, which many people felt that he won, but he didn't get the nod that night. And ultimately, he went back to being a contender. He was fighting on top-ranked shows. Then he went to PBC. His career was kind of a bit in limbo, and you got the impression that he was trying his best to climb the ladder of the heavyweight division to get a crack. Well, he got that shot. He made the most of it. And then it just seemed like any motivation just, went. It was just gone. And now it's kind of like, well, is the motivation there now all these years later? You questioned it in 2021. You questioned it in 2022. We're now in 2024. Again, it's nearly it's over 5 years since that win. And it's nearly 5 years since that rematch. So, the question I have and a lot of others have is, how motivated, how serious is Andy Ruiz taking his career moving forward? With Jarrell Miller, you get the impression that there is a little bit more seriousness there from his end, because he's not been heavyweight champion. He's not made life-changing sums of money. So you get the impression that he is still trying to get somewhere in his career. With Ruiz, you just don't know. He has talked about Joseph Parker, having a rematch with him if he comes through Jarrell Miller. But again, it's the if. With Andy Ruiz, he's not been looking in the best of shape, even by his standards. We don't know what way he's going to weigh in. With Jarrell Miller, he can be quite erratic at times. We don't know what way he's going to be in there. So there's a lot of question marks, a lot of what ifs in this fight. There really is. You're like, what if Ruiz doesn't turn up in the best of shape? What if he's not? But then you're saying the same about Jarrell Miller. So there's a lot of question marks in this fight. Ultimately, I think we're getting this fight where both guys are not in their peak. I don't think they are. And I think actually that makes the fight closer. It makes it more competitive. And I could sound cynical with this, but it actually probably makes the fight a little bit more fun, because you're going to see probably a lot more risks taken by both guys. You're going to see a lot more swings. You're going to see a lot more heavy leather flying than you maybe would if both guys were in their prime and really thinking about this fight. So I'm actually envisioning a very, very fun fight, however long it lasts. BoxRec don't actually have the rounds listed there for some reason, so I would assume, let's say it's a 10-rounder. I wouldn't imagine it's anything less than that. I would assume it's not anyway. So let's just say if we're talking over the course of 10 rounds, I would imagine we're going to see this fight set at a reasonably good pace. I think we're going to see big shots being thrown. I think with Andy Ruiz, that front foot counter punching will be key to him. And I think he needs to try and see if he can sting Miller early and see how much confidence Miller has in that chin of his. Because at the end of the day, he's coming off a stoppage loss, and people will say, oh, but gee, he wasn't knocked out by Daniel Dubois. The referee stopped the fight before Jarrell Miller, and Jarrell Miller was taking plenty of big shots before he hit the ground. Had the referee not stepped in and stopped it, there's no doubt in my mind Daniel Dubois would have put Jarrell Miller down. And had he got back up, I believe there would have been enough time. I think he would have taken him out clean. So he can turn around and say, well, I got stopped standing. He was on the verge of going down. He knows that. So Miller, who was someone who, spoke very highly of his chin and, I take a good shot, and this, that, and the other. Well, now he knows actually I could be hurt. And the Ruiz is going to know that. And if someone who had a lot of confidence in their chin before gets hurt, it's very difficult for that fighter to really have the same fate, because they're thinking, oh, the one thing I thought I had over that guy, or most of my opponents, is now gone. I might take a better shot than the average fighter, but I don't take as good a shot as I originally thought. So how is that chin going to be when it does get touched by someone like Andy Ruiz, who is not a puncher I would put on the level of a Daniel Dubois, an Anthony Joshua, a Deontay Wilder, Zillies. And I wouldn't put him on that level, but I think he has good enough power that he'll get any heavyweight's respect. If he can get Miller's respect and make Miller think before walking forward, that could be very interesting. It could be very crucial to Andy Ruiz winning this fight. What you also need to remember as well is, as I said, Jarrell Miller, can he work 3 minutes of every round? I don't think he can. He couldn't do it against Daniel Dubois. That was a 10-rounder. All right, this may very well be a 10-rounder again, I don't know. But he couldn't do it against Daniel Dubois in a 10-rounder. He could work very well for some rounds, but once Daniel Dubois was able to, get behind his jab, establish things, and just get the grips of what was going on with Miller, and Miller slowed down, it was plain sailing for Daniel Dubois. It really, truly was. So I think that Miller, he's going to want to, if he can work for 3 minutes of this round, or at least close to, he's in with a good shot. He is in with a good shot. As I said, I don't think we have both guys firing at their optimum best like we did, say, 5 years ago. So I think this fight actually will be a lot more fun. As I said, I think we're going to see a lot more heavy leather being thrown, a lot more swinging, a lot more missing, a lot more big shots. Wouldn't even surprise me if, one of them, maybe even if both of them touch down at some point in this fight, or certainly if both of them have a crisis. Maybe not necessarily touchdown, because both guys, to be fair, have pretty good chins. They do. I would say if we see at least one or both of these guys in a crisis in this fight at some point, that wouldn't shock me. And the funny thing is, if we see one of them in a crisis and the other fighter looks to capitalize on that, they may end up in a crisis, because they may end up emptying the tank on the other opponent. So I think we could see a lot of back and forth in this fight. That's why I'm looking forward to it so much. Ultimately, I have to give a pick on this fight. And my pick for this fight is, I think it's a distance fight. Although I love heavyweight boxing, and with heavyweight boxing, you normally kind of envision a knockout, I think we're in for a distance fight this fight. And I am going to go with Andy Ruiz to win a reasonably competitive fight. We'll say it's a 10-rounder. If it's a 10-rounder, we could be looking at a 6-4 scorecard. If it's a 12-rounder, we could be looking at an 8-4, 5-7 scorecard. It will depend, and something, what I say is, depending on how many rounds this fight is, if it's 10 rounds or 12 rounds, that could actually influence how this fight actually would go. Because if it is a 12-rounder, I think there's actually a higher chance, if it's a 12-rounder, of Ruiz actually getting to Jarrell Miller and stopping him late. If it's a 10-rounder, I'm fairly sure that it's going to be a decision, for either guy. But I think if it's a 12-rounder, more likely we're going to see a knockout or a stoppage at the least. So that's my thoughts on this. My pick is Andy Ruiz to win this fight on points if it's a 10-rounder. Outside bet on stoppage if it's a 12-rounder. This is just one fight, and I'm looking forward to previewing the rest of these fights. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, as always, people, if you haven't already. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. And for now, I'll leave it there. Peace.